Welcome to Her Story by Her Bible. This is a podcast studying the intersection of womanhood and the Bible, and we love having great discussions. I'm Jenny Steinbach, your host and the producer of Her Bible, and today I have Kendall Mariah, and I'm excited to introduce her to you and excited about what God is doing in and through her. So first off, welcome to Her Story, Kendall.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm thrilled and excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited too. And I wanted to start off by just asking about your spiritual journey because we're talking about our stories. And so I'd love to
Mm-hmm.
hear your story of how you came to Christ and, yeah, how you walk with Him.
Yeah, Jenny. First of all, I love that because for me, it frames everything in my life and it frames the book. I was one of those girls who was raised by loving Christian parents. I mean, my husband jokes because he was raised a little differently in a different family setting that, when you look at a nuclear family, my family was pretty much it. A loving mom and dad raised me in church. We didn't miss a Sunday. We didn't miss a Wednesday. My mom taught Sunday school, volunteered in the nursery. My parents, were interim youth pastors. My dad did sound and choir. We were just totally involved. And so that was my upbringing in the church, not just Sunday school, but VBS and tagging along when my parents helped with youth. And so church and relationship with God has always been tied in with my identity. I don't know life without God, and thankfully don't have to know life without God. And as a little girl, even before I even understood, a lot about what we were learning in scripture, verses I was reading, I truly felt a connection to God, to the creator of the world, that I could just innately sense that there was something bigger out there. And so I always leaned into that. I've always felt a spiritual connection. I loved church. I was not the kid you had to force to go. And so that just continued to evolve. And by the time I got to middle school and attending summer camp, and it was there that I felt the call to ministry. And, it's kind of a weird thing, first of all, like, what does that even mean as a 12 or 13-year-old, But for me particularly, I didn't know exactly what that meant. I didn't see myself as a youth pastor. I didn't see myself as a children's director. I didn't particularly see myself as a pastor in general, vocationally, or, a missionary. And well, the Lord did not give me the gift of song. I can sing in the choir just fine, but I'm not a soloist. I knew I wasn't called to like lead music. That's not in my gifting set. So I really wrestled with what did call look like? What did that mean for me? Because I didn't feel like I felt the call to those main target demographics that were very clearly laid out of vocational ministry. And so starting then, I started leading Bible school at school. Before school, I did that in high school, volunteering at church with younger grades. And in college, I was president of a Christian sorority. And it just always was enmeshed, but that call was always in the back of my mind. And I was trying to be a good steward of the seasons I was in, leading those Bible studies. And I was that kid in the youth group that if they were going to have a youth Sunday, who's going to speak? It was going to be Kendall. This is just who I was. It was my identity. But getting towards the end of college, especially when you go to an undergraduate program like I did at Campbell University that has a great theological school divinity program, I felt a pressure of like, okay, do I go? I feel the call to ministry, but I don't know what that looks like. And I remember meeting with the minister of spiritual formation. She's now actually one of the VPs at Campbell, Faith Beam, Dr. Faith Beam, and telling her and confessing to her, she already knew that I felt the call, but confessing to her that I wasn't sure about divinity school. And God had always spoke pretty clearly to me in my life, and not in the audible way, but like there would be a signs or I'd have a peace. And I never had it. Well, she said, well, if you're wrestling with it, you can do one of two things. If you don't feel like he's called you to it, he may one day call you to divinity school, he may not. Or you can go down that road, and then if it becomes clear that you're not supposed to, just stop, like the application process. And I will never forget, I had an older friend that was in divinity school, and he, was a couple years in, we had done some mission trips together. And so I invited him to coffee. I said, I'm filling out these applications to consider it. And I said, will you ask me some questions? And now remember, this is 2014, 2015. It is a different time in the church. It is a different time in culture for women in ministry particularly, and just it was a different time than it is right this second. And he said, "What part of Jesus' ministry do you most relate to?" And I remember sitting there thinking about it, and I said, "Well, truthfully?" He said, "Well, yeah, don't tell a story, don't lie about it." And I said, "Well, I think flipping over the table." And he looked at me like he could stare a hole right through my head. Like, "That's what you wanna go with? Are you sure?" And I was very unsure in saying it because I knew what the response might be. And he said, "What do you mean?" And I just said, and I've always felt this way, that God has called me to shed light on some things and to look at church and culture and just ask questions and say, "Hey, this is not okay," or "We've kind of missed the plot here." And so that was when I was 22 years old, and I decided not to go to divinity school after that and began a blog. And that blog turned into a Bible study group on Facebook that I've had for 9 years. I've done over 250 live Bible studies online. And I talk about the hard things of faith. I started out talking about infertility, depression, anxiety. I had friends come along with me and talk about eating disorders and just the difficult part of faith that a lot of women experience. And
Mm-hmm.
particularly 10 years ago, there was not conversations about mental health. There was not questions about infertility, especially in the faith realm. If it was talked about, it was like, well, maybe you're not praying hard enough. You're not doing these things. And I
Mm-hmm.
was that girl that did it. Jenny, I did all the right things, and it still didn't work out. And
Mm-hmm.
so in 2017, that's where the premise of this book started, on a trip with Faith Beam and a couple other ministers from Campbell, of the idea of soul friction, of those moments of
Mm-hmm.
I feel God working and moving, but it's not calling me into this like ethereal Holy Spirit moment like we have like maybe at church or with music and worship, but it's kind of the opposite. It was a frictiony tension of like, oof, I need to pay attention here. And growing up traditionally in the church or just in the South, culturally, a lot of times when you get those uncomfortable feelings, you want to sweep it under the rug. You want to act like it don't exist or pray to God to take it away. But I really felt called to lean into it and to say, why do I feel this way? What is
Mm-hmm.
God maybe trying to pull my attention to? Or where is he trying to get me to seek more clarity and discernment and to go deeper? And so that's where I've spent the last, I mean, that's 2017. I've spent the last, gosh, almost 9 years now kind of exploring that topic as just a moral kind of compass for myself and what has become of the book. But everything has shifted and changed. I would have never imagined at 13 that my ministry would be, using an online digital platform to be
Mm-hmm.
able to just bring people into my life. But yeah, I don't know life without God. I don't know life without Jesus, and where ministry and just showing up for the church is part of it. I serve now as a deacon at my church. I just finished 2 years as deacon chair and thankfully got to pass that title along in this busy season. But I believe in the local church and I'm hopeful for the local church, but I think we've got some work to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. That was an amazing story, and I'm so glad for what the Lord has brought you through and how you've been able to encourage other women. I was wondering if you could take one of the topics that you mentioned and the where there's soul friction and
Mm-hmm.
just kind of share more about it. Like
Mm-hmm.
what is it you're learning and what are women asking and
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that's really prevalent for my age group and kind of generation, I might be a little bit older than some of your audience, but as a millennial, I grew up in youth group and in college in the 2000s and 2010s. And purity culture was really big when I was in middle school and high school. And for me, I signed right up for it. I had the bracelet, and in the book, I talk about that, and I talk about a scenario where I was called out for it and experienced what now we would call like bullying. Just some
Mhm.
upperclassmen called me out in front of a lot of people, and you can read about it in the book. But it was a difficult time, and I felt a lot of shame around it. I felt shame for making that choice. There was shame attached to it. And then again, there was a lot of conversations at that point about how women dress and how we have to be careful, not to tempt boys or men, and it's different than it is now. Things have again changed. The definition of modesty and all has shifted a little bit. It was just so prevalent. Again, I felt a lot of shame. Like,
Mhm.
I could not detach, my feelings away from, seeing my body as a good thing,
Mhm.
seeing sex as a good thing, and as something that God had given us as part of our life. And then I go on to talk about experiencing sexual assault in college in a situation that didn't fit the normal what I thought. I thought based on growing up that if I was wearing the wrong thing, it might happen. If I was at the wrong place, it might happen. If I was around the wrong people, it might happen. In my scenario, and I write about it explicitly, didn't check any of those boxes.
Mm.
And again, I was doing all the right things and it still happened.
Mhm.
And so that really led to a deep friction point in my faith. And not just about purity culture, but again, about the shame that I felt towards my body, that
Mhm.
my body was a responsibility to keep from other people. It was a responsibility to, guard. Like, I felt very disconnected from my body. Like,
Mhm.
like it wasn't a good thing. And having a family member that had struggled with an eating disorder, and at that time, there was not a lot of body positivity as there is
Mhm.
now.
Mhm.
I just carried so much shame. And the more as I got older that I've studied about Jesus and about God's love for me and who God sees me as, and, why he has certain things that he wants for us and expects from us, I'm like, that shame was not anything that God ever meant for me to carry when it came to my body, when it came to, the gifts that he's given us and how it had been warped in a lot of ways and kind of weaponized against me. And I didn't know that. I mean, you're a child, I don't want to upset the guy that did purity culture. He was in charge of that. I mean, I think he's even denounced it, that the approach was wrong, and I think that's part of it that where a lot of us are having to work through, whether it's with deconstructing or just figuring out maybe some failed attempts that the church or whatever has done over the years of the heart's in the right place, but the execution of it
Mhm.
is bringing on more trauma than it was worth. So that's a big conversation, particularly among women right now who
Mhm.
are older, who are now married, that are still carrying some baggage from that, and how to reconcile their relationship with their body. Because it comes up
Mhm.
again, as you get married, it comes up again as you're having children, and trying to say, okay, now that I have a daughter, how do I want her to feel about her body?
Mhm.
you know and I don't think God ever meant sex to be tied to shame for us. I think that he gives us direct us to save us from hurt, because he's a loving father, he's a gracious father. And just like I know what's best for my daughter so that she don't hurt herself, why she didn't touch the hot stove or she's not allowed to run with scissors. you know God tells us certain things not to fill us with shame or to try to keep us from a good thing, but just to protect us until it's in the right context. And I go into that a little bit more about even how my brain even shifted on that a bit. But I just wish I could free women of that same shame that I've
Mhm.
carried for so many years. But that's something that now, as a mom to a 6-year old, that I also don't want to pass on. It's like, how do we talk about this in a God loving way that I feel like he would talk to his daughters about. He's such a gracious and merciful father, and that the way we see Jesus interact with women, I just don't think the way that particular topic for women specifically has been handled in a way that Jesus would have handled it.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. And I can relate to some of the things you shared and that shame and separation from your body. And so
Mhm.
I totally relate to that. And I grew up in a religious culture and
Mhm.
not a Christian culture, but it was supposed to be a Christian culture. But
Mhm. And that's
anyway,
hard and confusing, I'm sure, adding another
yeah,
layer.
right, yes. And so much when I became a believer at age 18 and I joined a Bible study,
Mhm.
and that was really new for me. And as I was reading the word and really absorbing the word and looking at, just like a sponge, and it was all new to me
Mm.
because, it was talked about, but it wasn't, we weren't encouraged to read it. And so now I
Mhm.
was, and just learning and growing and learning to forgive from my
Mhm.
background and also dealing with shame too. But I wanted to ask you, what are some special passages from the Bible that helped you walk through that shame and release that shame?
Mhm.
And, where would you encourage people to look today if they're dealing with that?
Ultimately, for me, there's not a ton of scripture that speaks specifically to some of those exact situations. And in the book, I go through how the Bible, even its definition of marriage and the context of marriage, is even different than what we have now. So for me, that even made it a little bit more confusing and a little bit convoluted. When we have examples of, concubines and multiple wives, or, the idea of a kinship redeemer, that was kind of confusing. Part of my story is infertility. My husband and I have been married for over 10 years now. We've not had a biological child. And one of the things I had to really dissect for myself with that, because again, that's another layer to your body, and my body fails at the one thing I was told it's supposed to do naturally. It's supposed to be such a natural thing, and my body can't do it. Why not? And again, you do the right things, you think you're going to have the right outcome. But I really had to separate my own emotions from it and look at just the scripture that talks about Jesus's character, or points to Jesus's character more so, and about how Jesus interacted with women. And the story of the woman that had 5 husbands, or said that she had 5 husbands. About 5 or 6 years ago, I sat on a hermeneutical class led by Lisa Harper, and she talks about that particular story, and about how for so long we've talked about it being divorce, that she'd had 5 husbands, or had slept with 5 different men. It's the way it's kind of pitched to us. But truly, based on the context, you would have not been allowed to marry and divorce 5 times unless there was a good reason, and a reason that was sound, not just to your husband, but to the community, to prove that you were worthwhile of marriage. And so, it was highly likely that the reason she had had 5 husbands is because she could not produce an heir for the 4 previous husbands. That's why she had gotten to number 5. And that cut my mind wide open, in the sense that I was like, one, fertility is not this new thing. And sometimes it feels like when we have issues, we think this is brand new. No one's ever dealt with this before. I mean, we have the example of Hannah from the Old Testament, of course, but here's another scenario, but also a scenario that was wrapped in shame. Even when she was trying to do the right thing, she was trying to be married and trying to produce an heir. It just couldn't happen for her. And the love and the grace that Jesus extended to her, and just the kindness, and like just seeing her not for her inadequacies, it wasn't even sin. Like, she couldn't help, just like the ways that society or culture at that time would have said, you're not worthy, or you can't do the one thing you're supposed to be able to do, and I'm sure the pressure was even higher back then, when, lineage and money and, all of that was tied to creating a child. And so, I've had to have some difficult conversations with people online and in people in Bible study and ministry, because there is this belief sometimes still in Christian culture that if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, then God's going to automatically give you those promises of your heart, with having a baby, or that your marriage is only real or blessed or ordained by God if you can produce an heir. And I'm like, that is not God. That was a cultural thing. And listen, God could bless us at any time, to have a child, biologically. But I've truly found peace in knowing that we can be doing the right thing at the right time and it still not work out. And it's not because I didn't believe hard enough. It's not because I didn't pray the right prayer, that sometimes it just does not work out. And that Jesus doesn't see my inadequacies and label me by them. He, loves me for who I am. And I think also, just as a woman, detaching my identity from being a mother or how motherhood came to me. I'd always had a heart for adoption. I had never wanted to even get pregnant until I found out I couldn't. And then that's something I've had to work through is, am I trying to get pregnant because I actually want to be pregnant, or feel like God's calling me to raise a child biologically, or because I'm trying to prove the doctors wrong and show like, yes, I can, even though you say I can't. But to reconcile that God calls women to other things outside of just being a mom. And being a mom is part of many women's stories and a lot of women's stories, but some women's is not part of their story altogether. And some people have other parts of their stories too that are important and that are part of their ministry and God's call for their life. And so really, I think, especially when it's topics like that the Bible doesn't directly speak to every time very explicitly, or another one is, I've struggled with, I'm neurodivergent. I'm on the spectrum, and that's not necessarily in the scripture. What do I do about taking medication? Do I take it? Do I not? Is this God? Did God create me this way for a reason, or did He also create medicine as a tool? And so I kind of go through that whole conversation in the book as well. I went 25 years without ever trying a medication, but hit a breaking point as a new mom where I just couldn't do it by myself anymore, and not just with God too. I needed more help, and I sought a Christian doctor that was wonderful to help me walk through and give me confidence in making the right choice. But, the Bible doesn't explicitly talk about whether or not with ADHD I should take Vyvanse or not.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we're struggling with scenarios like that, I think it's just always important to go back to what is true about Jesus' character. And, I've thought about that with other issues that I've dealt with. And we want everything to be black and white in the Bible. We want everything to be
Mm-hmm.
served to us on a clear silver platter, with labels. And that's just not how it works. But I think that just is a good reminder to us that faith is about intimate relationship with Christ and our need for discernment and the gift of the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was thinking about maybe some of our listeners who don't know much about the character of Jesus, and I was
Mm,
wondering if you could describe him more from your experience and how he met you in difficult places.
yeah. I love that question, and I'll give you an example. And this is not in the book, and I don't know that I've talked about it too many places, but I was 23 years old. I was a newlywed, and I was very busy in college. I was a triple major. I was president of my sorority. In the semester before graduation, the fall semester before, is when I had to have an emergency surgery and one of my ovaries removed. I was taking 22 credit hours at the time, and then followed the spring with 24 credit hours. While I had all this other stuff going on, and I was engaged to my now husband, and we were planning this huge, Southern wedding. So I was very busy. It was a busy season of life. Then I get married. I moved to the West Coast from the South, and I have one car. We're broke newlyweds, as you are right when you get married, especially
Mm-hmm.
so young.
In an expensive part of the country.
Oh my word! Yes, we were just talking about that this morning, and all of my identity had been taken away. You know,
Mm-hmm.
who I was in my community, the leadership that I had exhibited in my church, in my town, because I'm from a small town, that position I held in college and all those things. Nobody cared. Nobody knew. And I do mention in the book how, going from the South to the West Coast it is a cultural shift, not just
Yes,
in
it
how I
is.
talk, but I make the joke that I look like an Easter egg at a Halloween party, because
You.
I dress colorfully, and people, especially in 2015, 2016, it was very hipster culture. I would tell my husband people either look like they were doing one of two things: about to go hiking or about to go see a Nirvana tribute band. Like, that's how they dressed. And I did not fit that script.
Mm-hmm.
And so my mental health really suffered. I was going through some new diagnosis, health issue wise, hormone issues, as all women sometimes have to deal with. And I fell into a lot of anxiety that was so deep it bridged on paranoia.
Oh.
And there was this one night particular that my husband was gone for training, and I was in our little 400 square foot apartment, and my paranoia had like overcome me so much. I literally just got in the corner of the bedroom and I'm like rocking, like trying not to have panic attack and crying. And I just asked, I just cried out and said, like, Jesus, just hold me, just hold
Mm-hmm.
me. And after rocking there for probably 15, 20 minutes and just repeating that phrase over and over again, I felt a peace like that I couldn't explain. That I went from literally feeling like, kid you not, like the Taliban was after me. Like, I had gotten this weird
Mm-hmm.
storyline in my head to 20 minutes later, I am just saying, Jesus, hold me over and over and over again, and a peace coming over me. And that's such a real life illustration for me. But I think that's who Jesus is. He goes and then he meets with you wherever you are. I love the Jewish principle of Shiva. It's the idea, and Jesus was a Jew, of course, that you go and sit with someone who's in grief, who's hurting. You don't say anything, you don't do anything, you just be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Jesus is someone that can walk into your scenario and he can perform a miracle. He can change your life, of course, but he also is just going to sit with you, and he's going to provide you comfort like a friend. He is just going to be sometimes that equalizing presence that grounds you and helps you realize, okay, whatever's in my head is in my head. It is not true. And I think we sometimes underestimate just how much presence is. I think over the last 5 or 6 years, culture is realizing that's more important with, talks of loneliness, and we live in our screens and our phones so much. But sometimes just having the presence of somebody with you when you're having a hard time is a gift, and we've lost that art. But I think Jesus gives us that example over and over, like the way he met with the woman at the well, the way that he, just constantly was willing to sit with people that other people wouldn't. And he didn't go in there, and this is my favorite part of Jesus. He doesn't go in there with a pamphlet and saying, listen to what I'm saying, or you're going to go to hell. He just goes and beats with them. He meets them where they're at. Like he's probably asking, what are y'all eating? Where are y'all from? Where are you traveling to? Like just trying to get to know them and understand them. And so I think that's what I appreciate the most about Jesus is that he's willing to be there with me, and that when I call out to him, he can give me that gift of peace and just presence that nothing else in culture, nothing else that even in church, in religion can offer you. And I think that's also what separates our belief in him from a lot of other religions or spiritual practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I love that and love what you are sharing about Jesus and how he meets us where we are. He's the one who created us and
Hmm.
loves us so much. So you had this moment with Jesus, but let's talk about the practical because you're
Hmm.
living in this town where you don't know anybody. And then tell me what happened after that. How did you find friends and community?
Yeah, that's something I talk about too in the book, and I truly believe the best way to connect with other people is by one of two things. Find an interest group, like a hobby group, something that you enjoy, more like interest based. I have friends that needlepoint or play mahjong, those sort of things. But then the other thing, which is my preference, is through service based organizations. So as a military spouse, I like to join like the spouses club board or the FRG, which is family readiness group, because there is something grounding. And I don't know, just the idea that we all come from different backgrounds, but we're here for one purpose, whether that's to stock a food pantry or make a meal or buy Christmas presents for somebody. Like I'm a part of our local women's club here in town, philanthropic club. That to me helps so much. And I know that sounds like you're like, Kendall, you didn't say join a church or or join a Bible study. And I think that's important for sure. But one, that's can be incredibly intimidating when you're moving to a new place. At least it was for me. And so getting involved on a smaller level in something that I already felt familiar with, like a service project, Habitat for Humanity, or being able to serve with a common goal just felt more natural to me because church in the Pacific Northwest is different than it is in the South. The denomination that our church is a part of isn't even represented there, or at least it wasn't at the time. It wasn't somewhere where we could go. So that that felt really difficult. Part of the reasons I started my online Bible study group. But I really think finding something you're interested in or a way that you can serve something you're passionate about. Maybe you're passionate about my brother and sister-in-law are a part of the Native Plant Society in South Carolina and in their town. And so it's just something they're passionate about and they do that. And then within those groups, you find somebody you have something in common with. And then you say, oh, hey, do you happen to attend church or are you a part of a Bible study group? And then you have that one friend that you can meet with at church. Because there's something, I think, one, because church is such a spiritual thing that already comes with kind of a heavier feeling when you walk in. And not to know anybody in a room is difficult. But to have like that one person or that one friend that's like, hey, could I join you at your next Sunday or service or Bible study group? It helps so much. So I've moved all the way around the country. That has been my strategy every single time is find
Mhm.
another way that I can plug into the community. Or now, I mean, now Facebook groups and you can find interest groups online so easily or within threads on
Mhm.
Instagram posts. I mean, I'm sure y'all even have resources for stuff like that too, where it's just like, I just need that one person that's like, hey, I'll sit with you can come sit with me. Can I come sit with you? Or
Mhm.
if you're on the other end of that, like one thing I try to leave open ended a lot with my stuff online is, hey, I'll be that one person. You need somebody to sit with at church. Message me and I'll save you a seat.
Mhm.
And I think that's, we're called to do that as part of discipleship as well.
Mhm. Yes, we have definitely been working on creating resources, but I wanted to talk a little bit about her Bible too and how
Mhm.
we're doing that. And part of our passion is for women to take their identity from what God says about them, not what the world says about them.
Mhm.
and and even as we model who's reading the scriptures, that is a model about God. It is a model about spirituality and God's view of women. And so we
Mhm.
wanted women to know that their voices matter in God's
Mhm.
kingdom and matter in God's work. So that's why we recorded the Bible in women's voices. And we also
Mhm.
wanted it to represent the whole ethnicity and diversity of the United States. And
Mhm. I love that.
so, and to honor women's voices and to represent heaven too.
For sure.
And yeah, and also, for women to feel like it's a safe place. And we wanted women to bring to the reading of God's word what they would like to bring
Yeah.
to the heart. And again, trying to express God's heart, like when you
Mhm.
were describing Jesus. As we read the word, we're trying to build that picture, even though sometimes the word can be hard to hear,
Mhm.
hard to understand. God's heart is still behind it. And
Mhm.
how can we express God's heart so that people can hear his heart behind some of the hard places? And
Mhm.
so that was our goal in recording the Bible in women's voices. And then we're starting Spanish now. And
Oh, cool.
so we completed English in 22, and it's also
Mhm.
available on YouVersion if people love to use YouVersion.
Yeah.
And then also, there's our app with at her.bible. So you can find it on the App Store or on the website. It's been wonderful to hear people's response. And you were talking about coming alongside people because
Mhm.
sometimes being able to listen while you're driving or
Mhm.
folding laundry for me, and things
Mhm.
like that is, just bring your thoughts to the Lord instead
Mhm.
of the negative things that are playing
For sure.
in my mind. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Because we're all in a battle and it doesn't stop when you get older. You
No.
know, maybe. Maybe I've worked hard on forgiveness and with my father in particular, but that doesn't mean that I don't have that issue with other people or lots of things to still work through. And it's interesting for me to hear, from your perspective as a millennial and just what women in your age group are, what influenced them when they were young and what they're having to work through now as a result of it. And
Mhm.
so that's one reason why, again, thinking about recording the Bible in women's voices because I wanted women younger than me to have that opportunity to hear it and to see that modeled, and for
Mhm.
me to fight the battles of my generation that I need to in order to do that, to make that available for younger women.
Mhm.
So,
I love that.
oh, thank you. Oh, I'd love it if you shared about your book. So you've mentioned it, but
Mhm.
tell us a little more and this little fire of mine. And
Yes. So, if you can't already tell, it's a play on the song that we often sang as kids. I mean, my daughter's supposed to sing it with the children's choir this Sunday at church, "This Little
uh-huh.
Light of Mine." And it linked to the fact that I was that good little church girl. I knew the
Mhm.
songs, I knew the scriptures, I knew the stories, and I did my best. Of course, I made mistakes and messed up, but I did my best to follow the rules and to do the right thing. and yet life still happens. We don't baptism does or accepting Jesus into our heart does not give us a free pass to all of life's hardships. And it also doesn't make hardships that we go through not hurt.
Mhm.
Trauma is still trauma. And so my book, I really hope, serves as a tool for one, but also as a warm, inviting conversation with
Mhm.
difficult topics. My husband said, "Well, you write just like you talk. This sounds like you." And I said, "Well,
Mhm.
good." He said it was an easy read with hard conversations. And that's exactly what I want it to be. Like as if you, Jenny, and I were meeting for coffee and said, "Hey,
Mhm.
this is what I'm having to work through right now, and I want you to hear how I'm processing this."
Mhm.
And so I was that little girl that had a lot of questions. I talk about how I stood up in a church meeting, a finance meeting as an elementary student, asking why we're spending money on certain things and why we weren't doing other things with it. And at a small church, you can imagine about how that went. And again, I said at the very beginning, I was related to Jesus flipping over the table. Like I'm not worried about confrontation within church because I
Mhm.
love the church so much. I want us to get it right. And I
Mhm.
want to help pull focus back to Jesus and what God had
Mhm.
intended for us. But life had a lot of different plans that I had. And I experienced things like I lost my mother in law to suicide before we got married. And she
Mhm.
was the most faithful person I knew, loved Jesus, and served in her church, and was a great example to me. Yet she still struggled. And I had no idea this was
Mhm.
back in 2011. No one talked about those things back then.
Mhm.
And reconciling that and what I know was true about God and how she loved God and working through that. And I'm hopefully encouraging people to believe and understand that things like doubt and deconstruction that sometimes people want to run from are actually invitations for us to lean in and go deeper. I talk about the most transformative class for me in my faith in college had nothing to do with religion. It was an art class. One of my three majors was art, and I had to take art history. And one of our things we had to do was study a particular piece of art and learn about it. Then we have to come, give a presentation on it, explain what we saw or learned.
Mhm.
And being a cocky 8 or 19-year-old student, I memorized that whole paragraph. I was a good straight A student and I was ready. And my professor heard me spout off this paragraph of information about this Baroque art piece. And he just kind of gave me a blank stare. And I kind of looked blankly back at him, like, I'm done. And he's like, so what else? And I'm like, what do you mean, what else? I said literally everything that was in the textbook. Like, I nailed it in my head. And he said, "You said all the right facts, but you're not asking the right questions." And that again, just kind of blew the top off my head. And I looked at him like he had four eyes. Like, what do you mean? You told me to bring facts. We're supposed to be presenting the facts about this painting or talking about it. And he said, art is a representation, it's the illustration, it's telling a story. We want to know the who, the why, the context for the piece, that goes beyond, you know, numbers and
Mhm.
what year. And it really just made me had to think just more critically about, the choice of color palette,
Mhm.
what's in the background, what's in the foreground, why are the models posed in that way or not posed in that way. And began applying that same kind of critical thinking, critique to scripture, to my faith. And
Mhm.
asking more questions did not make me believe less. It actually helped me dig a deeper well and to
Mhm.
find something richer and more meaningful. And so when more things popped up, when more things happened in life and culture and just all these things, and I had questions, I wasn't scared of the questions. I could feel
Mhm.
that friction of like oof, this is different. I'm not sure. I don't have a direct answer. Or again, I can't go straight to scripture and find a specific line that speaks right to this. So what do I do?
Mhm.
But giving you the tools and also the permission to not feel shame about having questions. I love Thomas. Everybody calls him Doubting Thomas, but he's Thomas to me. And
Mhm.
I proposed the idea that what if Thomas was not a doubter? What if he is someone that was just wired differently?
Mhm.
I'm divergent. I'm not neurotypical. My brain works a little bit differently than others people. And so I relate so much to sometimes just being the person that's going to say the thing that needs to be said. But also, if you told me somebody rose from the dead and I never saw that in that way, or that, especially when I watched them die, I would have questions. Like, it would just be natural to me. It's not because I doubted, just like the questions
Mm-hmm.
I have now are not because I doubt. It's because I just need to know more.
Mm-hmm.
It's because I care. I want to know more.
Mm-hmm.
And, giving Thomas not just grace, but seeing how Jesus treated Thomas. He did not scold Thomas. He did not, say, I'm not going to give you proof. I mean, he literally showed up just for Thomas, for one person, to meet the need and to give the example. And in the book, I want people to read it and to feel empowered to ask questions, to feel like when they're noticing things in culture, I talk about, even having to work through feelings of being disenfranchised as someone who experienced racism when we adopted our daughter, and how the Christians were responding to certain things going on in
Mm-hmm.
2020. And how do I reconcile all of that? And so all of that is there. And the book ends with asking the most important question to me is, why do you believe what you believe? Do you believe
Mm-hmm.
it because somebody else told you to believe it? Or do you believe it because you know it true to be of God? Because
Mm-hmm.
you've read it, you've learned it, you've seen it in practice, you've seen God show up in the world in that way. And not because I'm trying to stump you, not because I'm trying to do a gotcha of like, oh, you believe that just because somebody told you, but because I want it to, as someone who loves the Bible and loves God so much, I want you to love it and feel the securedness that
Mm-hmm.
comes from going deep and asking yourself hard questions that I take you through what seem like some frivolous exercises, but really helping you to kind of do some rewiring of your brain and kind of
Mm-hmm.
refocusing on what's actually important and not just what all the noise around us, even the noise that sometimes comes from well-meaning places like church or
Mm-hmm.
online from Christian accounts, but just helping us trying to refocus on what's most important.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love that because he created us with a mind and with
Yes.
and he loves our questions. He loves it when we go deeper. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody calls their quiet time, but I'm a quality time person in the love
Yeah.
languages, and so
Yeah.
I just thought it needs to be a quality time person. And one time I was complaining, and the Lord said, "Well, I'm a quality time person too." And
Oh,
it's like, okay, well,
yeah.
thank you. We can have quality time together.
That's right.
Um, yeah, as we seek Him and spend time with Him. And as you were talking about the questions too, Jesus asked a lot of questions.
Right. Exactly.
Yes, that's
Exactly.
exactly what He does. It's what He wants
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
us to be solid in our faith in Him and to truly experience Him, not just to hear about Him, but to have that deep
Hmm.
personal connection. So
Hmm.
I
Exactly.
resonate with what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he wants to have that close personal relationship. Like we said at the very beginning that I appreciate about him is that he will come and be in your presence, and
Hmm.
it's an intimate relationship. Like, you know, when you have an intimate relationship with a friend where you're really close and you can speak vulnerably with that
Yes.
friend or a spouse or whoever it
Hmm.
is, you are able to go deeper and
Hmm.
have difficult conversations, and sometimes even have conversations that at the end of it, you didn't come to a resolution, but you just needed to talk through it.
Yes.
But you only feel safe to have that when you've had that quality time.
Hmm.
When you have had to work through some things, you don't feel that way about a complete stranger. You don't feel
Hmm.
that way about somebody you only see twice a year at family get-togethers. It comes with time and experience and being willing to be vulnerable and to commit to the process of both discipleship and sanctification. But there's so
Hmm.
much beauty and just love that we get from God through both those things.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much, Kendall. This has been just a really great conversation, I think, and I hope our listeners are encouraged by what you've been sharing and challenged. And I'm excited about them getting your book and asking those questions and digging deeper and
Yes,
experiencing
thank you
more of
so
Jesus.
much. Thank you. If anybody has any questions for me, I keep my inboxes open. And so you can find me everywhere online at Kendall Mariah, spelled KendallMariah. And I do a free Bible study that has been going on for a long time now, but it's a Facebook group called Unapologetic with Kendall Mariah. And you can get my book everywhere, but also an Audible if you like to listen, as you talked about listening to books. I prefer that way too, in the
Yes.
car, or I put my earphones in while I'm doing other things around the house. So I've read that too. So if you enjoy that, you can find it as well. But Jenny, thank you so much for being willing to sit and talk with me and share this space with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us
Yeah.
on Her Story by Her Bible, and have a great day.